President Biden was asked if he wished the negotiations of the debt ceiling bill were started earlier. He replied it wouldn't have made a bit of difference. At the White House, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News.
For some perspective tonight on this agreement, we are joined tonight by Ludwig Chincarini, a finance professor at the University of San Francisco School of Management. Thank you so much, Professor, for being here. This deal is now ready to move to Congress for a vote, but that could indeed be a very difficult path. What issues do you see ahead?
I think it will pass because both sides realize that they don't pass it, there'll be turmoil. So I think it'll pass it. Long run, we have to always worry. It's a relief to get it passed, but also remember the U.S. has a large debt, and someone's going to pay that one day, probably our children. So it's a good news, and I think it will pass, but then we have to remember there's also a bigger credit line.
President Biden said the agreement is an important step forward that reduces spending while protecting critical programs for working people and growing the economy for everyone. In your opinion, is this a good deal for the country?
We have to get a deal because the government spends a certain amount. So if we didn't get a deal, there would be a lot of chaos. Another question is, should we lower the debt GDP ratio for the United States going forward? But that's a longer term discussion.
Okay, so now we have the president and House Speaker McCarthy trying to go out and sell this deal. What items will they be selling to Republicans, and what items will they be selling to Democrats?
Great question. I think the Biden and the Democrats will say we didn't really give up much. McCarthy will say, we took away some spending from the IRS plan. We're putting some attachments that if you receive welfare checks, you have to work a bit. And so I think they'll sell it to both sides. One will say we cut spending and we added more of our programs, and the other will say we didn't cut a lot of our major programs on the Biden side. So I think that's what both will say.
Okay, so if this doesn't pass, if there was something that came up and they couldn't agree and it did default on our debts, what could that mean for the average American? How catastrophic could that be?
Oh, that could be devastating. They have other ways to pay a lot of the bills, shut down the government. You might remember with Trump, the government shut down for a bit. So there's other ways before they default. A default would be pretty catastrophic because there's so many ripple effects throughout the world. Most countries in the world hold U.S. Treasury securities. So those Treasury securities, if you default, would lose a lot of value. So I don't think that's going to be what will happen. But yeah, it would be a pretty major event.
Again, we expect the first vote on this tentative deal to happen next week, possibly Wednesday. Really appreciate your time tonight, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. New at 10 tonight, Oakland firefighters were busy today with a fire at an apartment